But how vast is the difference in everything which meets us on crossing to the eastern side over the Skardus Pass. Here, numerous springs at the base of the central chain swell into mighty rivers, which flow into broad lowlands, and these lowlands are embraced in great circlets by the mountain ranges which belt the plain, and leave only a narrow egress into the sea for the rivers of the country. Inner Macedonia consists of a succession of 3 such encircled plains, the waters of which unite and force themselves into the recess of the deeply indented Gulf of Thessalonica. For Macedonia is favored above Illyria, not only by the great arable plains of its interior, but also by an accessible, hospitable coast. Instead of monotonously savage lines of coast, a broad mass of mountains here springs out between the mouths of the Axius and the Strymon, and extends far into the sea with 3 rocky projections, abounding in bays, of which the easternmost terminates in Mount Athos. More than 6,400 feet it rises above the sea, with its precipitous walls of marble, equidistant. More than 6,400 feet it rises above the sea, with its precipitous walls of marble, equidistant from the entrance of the Hellespont and from that of the Pagasaian Gulf. It casts its shadow as far as the marketplace of Lemnos, and offers a guiding point for navigation, visible many miles off and commanding the whole northern archipelago. By this Greek formation of their coasts, Macedonia and Thrace are connected with the Greek world, while the territorial condition of their interior is totally different from that of Hellas proper. They are highland countries where the population, cut off from the sea, is, as it were, held enchained in secluded circles of valleys. The 40th degree of latitude cuts the knot of mountain ranges, which announces a new formation towards the south. The country loses the character of alpine land. The mountains, besides becoming lower, tamer, and more capable of cultivation, arrange themselves more and more into a discernible system of hilly chains surrounding the cultivated plains, and dividing and protecting the country without making it inaccessible, savage, and barren. This advantage in the organization of the country, however, again prevails only on the eastern side, where the fertile basin of the valley of the Peneus spreads out amidst its hills. On the side of the sea, too, it is shut out by the Ossa range, which, under the name of Pelion, parallel to Athos, extends into the sea like a rocky mole. Twice, however, the mountains are broken through, and Thessaly at the same time emptied of its waters and opened to external intercourse towards the east, viz., at the water gate of the Vale of Tempe, and again to the south, where, between Pelion and Othris, the Pagasian Gulf stretches deep and broad into the land. And now towards the south the formation of the country continues to increase in multiplicity, and to the ramification of the mountains correspond the base of the sea, opening into the land from the east and west. By this means the whole body of the country is so manifoldly broken up that it becomes a succession of peninsulas connected with one another by isthmuses, and at the same point, under the 39th degree of latitude, begins central Greece, Hellas in the stricter sense of the name, where, between the Ambracian and Melian gulfs, the conical height of Timphrestus rises to a height of more than 7,000 feet, and again binds together in the center the eastern and western halves of Greece. Towards the west, Timphrestus towers over the regions watered by the Achelous, which, with the districts contiguous to them, remain excluded from the more broken up formation of the eastern half. Towards the east, the Seta chain extends, and at the southern border of the Malian Gulf forms the pass of Thermopylae, where, betwixt morass and precipitous rock, the mere breadth of a road is left for reaching the southern districts. From Thermopylae straight across to the Corinthian Gulf, the distance is less than 6 miles. Geographical. This is the isthmus commencing from which the peninsula of eastern central Greece extends as far as the promontory of Sunium. The main mountain range of this peninsula is the Parnassus, whose crest, 7,500 feet in height, was held sacred by the generations of men dwelling around it, as the starting point of a new human race. From its northern base, the Cephissus flows into the great basin of the Boeotian Valley, bounded by the Helicon with its ramifications. Helicon is closely followed by Cithaeron, another cross range from sea to sea, separating Attica from Boeotia. It would be difficult to find two countries contiguous to and at the same time more different from one another than these. Boeotia is an inland territory, complete and secluded in itself, where the superabundant water stagnates in the depths of the valleys, a land of damp fogs and luxuriant vegetation on a rich soil. The whole of Attica is projected into the sea, which it admits into its bays. Its soil is dry and rocky and covered with a thin coating of earth, and it is surrounded by the clear, transparent atmosphere of the island world to which, by situation and climate, it belongs. Its mountain ranges carry themselves on in the sea and form the inner group of the Cyclades, just as the outer group consists of the continuations of Euboea. Once upon a time, Attica was the southernmost member of the continent of Greece, till out of the waters emerged the low, narrow bridge of land, which was to add the island of Pelops as the completest of peninsulas, as last and concluding member to the body of the mainland. Thus, without severing the continuous cohesion of the country, in the midst of it two broad inland seas, abounding in harbors, meet one another, the one opening towards Italy, the other towards Asia. The Peloponnesus forms a whole by itself. It contains in its own center its principal mountain range, whose mighty bulwarks embrace the high inland country of Arcadia, while its ramifications break up the surrounding districts. These are either mere terraces of the inner highland country, like Arcadia and Elis, or new mountain ranges issue, and running in a south or eastward direction form the trunk of new peninsulas. Such is the origin of the Messenian, Laconian, and Argive peninsulas, and of the deeply cut gulfs between them, with their broad straits. Equal in rich variety to the outline of the country is the constitution of its interior. Equal in rich variety to the outline of the country is the constitution of its interior. On the monotonous tableland of Arcadia, one fancies oneself in the midst of an extensive inland district. The basins of its valleys participate in the organization and the heavy foggy atmosphere of Boeotia, whereas the closely packed mountain chains of western Arcadia resemble the wild alpine scenery of Epirus. The west coast of Peloponnesus corresponds to the flat shores of the Achelous districts. The rich plains of the Pamissus and Eurotas are natural gifts of the river, as is the case of the Thessalian Peneus, which flows out of mountain clefts. Finally, Argolis, with its Inachus plain, opens towards the south, and its peninsula, abounding in rocky harbors and projecting islands, is both by situation and soil like a second Attica. Thus the creative nature of Hellas once more, in the southernmost member of the country, repeats all its favorite formations, compressing within narrow limits the great variety of contrasts. Notwithstanding this confusing multiplicity in the relations of the soil, we find asserting themselves in all their severity certain plain and clear laws, which impress upon the whole of European Greece the mark of a peculiar organization. Among these are the cooperation of sea and mountains in marking off the different parts of the country. Further, the series of crossbars running out from the central range and, in combination with the Illyrico-Macedonic highlands, rendering access to the dwellings of the Greeks impossible from the north, isolating them from the mainland, and confining them entirely to the sea and the opposite coasts. The very nature of the northern highlands forces their inhabitants to live in their narrow, well-watered valleys as peasants, shepherds, and hunters, to steal their strength by the alpine air and to preserve it intact amidst their simple and natural conditions of life, until the time shall have come for them to descend into the regions farther to the south, the more subdivided and manifold formation of which has, in turn, assigned to them the mission of becoming a theater for the creation of states, and of leading their inhabitants in an eastward direction into the maritime and coast intercourse of a new and wider world. For, in fine, of all the laws which regulate the formation of the countries of European Greece, this is at once the most undeniable and the most important, that, beginning at the Thracian coast, the east side is marked out as the frontage of the whole complex of countries. With the exception of two bays and of the Gulf of Corinth, the western sea, from Dyrrhachium to Methone, washes nothing but precipitous cliffs, or a flat shore and accretion of the sea, and disfigured by lagoons, while innumerable deep bays and anchorages open from the mouth of the Strymon as far as Cape Malea to invite the inhabitants of the islands hard by to sail into, or their own populate while innumerable deep bays and anchorages open from the mouth of the Strymon as far as Cape Malea to invite the inhabitants of the islands hard by to sail into, or their own population to sail out of them, the form of rocky coast which prevails on the east side and renders maritime intercourse possible at almost every point of a long line of shore, at the same time conduces to a superior healthiness of climate, and is better adapted for the foundation of cities. Thus the whole history of Hellas has thrown itself on the eastern coast, and those tribes which were driven into the rear of the land, such as, e.g., the Western Locrians, were by this means simultaneously excluded from active participation in the progress of the national development. The history of a nation is by no means to be regarded solely as a consequence of the natural condition of its local habitations. But thus much it is easy to perceive, a formation of soil as peculiar as that commanding the basin of the archipelago may well give a peculiar direction to the development of the history of its inhabitants. In Asia, great complexes of countries possess a history common to all of them. There one nation raises itself over a multitude of others, and in every case decrees of fate fall, to which vast regions, with their millions of inhabitants, are uniformly subjected. Against a history of this kind, every foot-breadth of Greek land rises in protest. There the ramifications of the mountains has formed a series of cantons, every one of which has received a natural call and a natural right. to a separate existence. The villagers of White Plains quail at the thought of defending their laws and property against an overpowering force of arms. They submit to what is the will of heaven, and the survivor tranquilly builds himself a new hut near the ruins of the old. But where the land which has been with difficulty cultivated is belted by mountains with lofty ridges and narrow passes, which a little band is able to hold against a multitude, there men receive, together with these weapons of defense, the courage for using them. In the members of every local federation arises the feeling of belonging together by the will and command of God. The common state grows by itself out of the hamlets of the valley, and in every such state there springs up at the same time a consciousness of an independence fully justified before God and man. He who desires to enslave such a land must attack and conquer it anew in every one of its mountain valleys. In the worst case, the summits of the mountains and inaccessible caves are able to shelter the remnant of the free inhabitants of the land. But besides the political independence, it is also the multiplicity of culture, manners, and language characteristic of ancient Greece, which it is impossible to conceive as existent without the multiplicitous formation of its territory, for without the barriers of the mountains, the various elements composing its population would have early lost their individuality by contact with one another. Now, Hellas is not only a secluded and well-guarded country, but on the other hand, again, more open to commerce than any other country of the ancient world.